Okay, so it's now 10:35 official James R. Kincaid time, and that little opening slide is just my little tribute to Edward Wakeling, because those are two of the many, many shelves in his collection. Wow. But that's us. Talking Alice is the topic today, and the question I'm not going to ask first is why Carroll? Why have you spent so many hours and days and years of your adult life thinking and talking and writing about Carroll and Alice and the author? But I want to make sure we come back to that question. So on official James R. Kincaid time, we need a 2-minute warning before we finish to go to answer the question of why Alice, Jim. First note that, as Arnold just pointed out, you took your PhD here at Case Western University, and now people are rather surprised to know that you actually took your undergraduate degree here, Mr. Distinguished Alumnus. So what led you here in the first place? Why, as an undergraduate, and ultimately, what about English as a major?
Hi. Let me say first what an honor it is to be here with the president of the Lewis Carroll Society of North America and also a wonderful friend.
Past president. Yeah.
Past president, okay.
But many presidents, including Arnold, the present president.
That's right. In those days, after a long time ago, in the 1950s, after Sputnik, there was enormous pressure on kids, I think, graduating from high school to go into science and engineering, which that pressure had not existed before, but a lot of scholarships became available if you were willing to do one thing in those areas. And so that's, without thinking much about it, came to Case as a electrical engineer, and then graduated in electrical engineering, realized how misplaced I was, and then came back. I was working in Cleveland for Union Carbide, came back to Western Reserve in their English department.
Well, Jim, this is your life, and the wonderful, erudite, hard-working staff in the Department of, or Division of Rare Books and in the archives have sought it with thimbles, and they sought it with care, and they've actually found your application to graduate school in English.
Oh my gosh.
And not only that, but you know, the horror of it. I have in my head the horror of it, as the White King says in the opening chapter. Yes. And they have your undergraduate photograph in your yearbook as well. But we haven't read them. You can relax, we haven't read any of it. But it's our little gift from the Case Western University.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So what is it about that attracted you to literature, especially Victorian literature and culture?
Yeah, the one thing that I noticed in the classes I took as a junior and senior at Case, electives in American Lit and Victorian Lit, was that it was a way of figuring in the world, that literature gave you shapes and forms by which you could understand the world and your place in it. And looking ahead, this was one of the things about Lewis Carroll that struck me as so profound in Carroll, that his fluidity in thinking about so many different ways of being in the world, and relationship to that world and to others in it. So I forget what you asked me.
Well, so back in the 1970s, you published pretty important books on Dickens, on Trollope, on Tennyson. But you also published an article in 1973 in MLA or PMLA, the Publications of the Modern Language Association, which is the ne plus ultra of literary scholarship and prestige. And that's pretty important for Carrollians because it helped establish Carroll's place in the Academy. And you could actually use the word, Carroll in the same sentence or same paragraph as, say, Dickens or Trollope or Carroll's friend Tennyson. So in that article, Alice's Invasion of Wonderland, you see Carroll as a kind of whining adult lashing out against the kid who ignores him, right? You write that in the Alice books, Alice is rejecting not only the horrifying chaos of meaninglessness, but the liberating chaos of comedy as well. And that the tonal ambivalence makes these books so baffling and complex.
Yeah, I said that, didn't I?
Yeah, you did. Of course, many readers, including many in this audience, don't exactly
Right.
see them a little differently than you do.
Well, they're wrong, aren't they? No, I think that the key is that where I say the tonal ambivalence, that it's not any one thing. That Carroll was one of the most remarkably complex writers of the century, or of ours too, and that there's no place to have him. It's just all over the place, in such a sophisticated way that we have both. One could see Lewis Carroll kind of impatient with Alice for not understanding, not connecting with him, but also a kind of joyous welcoming of Alice, a kind of sweet and pleasant attitude as well. So I think ambivalence is the key there. There's hardly anything in the Alice books that tonally that you can't find, because it's.
And we just heard, in fact. Exactly.
Yeah, right. What wonderful paper we just heard, which suggested and laid out all of that. So any kind of statement that Alice books mean A or A, B, C are incomplete. It's just an enormously open world. And Carroll said some words mean more than we mean to express when we say them, so a whole book ought to mean more than the writer expressed. That kind of statement sounds like theorists in the 70s, Jacques Derrida and the like. Here's Lewis Carroll on top of language in that kind of complex way. It's quite wonderful.
Okay, ready? I'm going to mention a name, and I want you to tell me what comes to mind. Alan Mandelbaum.
Dear Alan, he got this whole thing started, the Pennyroyal Alice. He brought Barry Moser and myself together, and I think Alan did so much to set us going on this project. One of the most generous-hearted academics, humans I've ever known.
Yeah, well, I knew him well, and he brought us together on that project as well. But he's the executive director of the Graduate Center at City University, visiting professor at Colorado and Jim there, and a famous poet and translator from classical languages as well as especially Italian into English in verse. So he's and Barry illustrated in one of his 75 engravings, that's Alan Mandelbaum infused into the Mad Hatter. And I brought along that, not original, but original print from the first edition of the Pennyroyal. of Alan as the Hatter. And you can pass that around, and it's red. I can find it at the end, I think. So for the record, so Barry went on with the Pennyroyal Alice to the Looking Glass with you. You wrote the critical preface, introductory, and you wrote the annotations, then finished up with the Snark, and then there was this commercial edition of all of those published by the University Press of California, University of California Press. Right. One of the things that Barry said was that he, in creating these characters, he said it was his habit, quote, to use congregations of real faces from my camera, from the street, from the local newspaper, which he called Gazette, upon which to build my characters. But then he insists, and insist is his word, that the sources are irrelevant to the final images. But I don't think that's exactly right when you see the he was a madman, Mandelbaum, full of energy and compassion and people, and not, pulling hats, rabbits out of hats all the time. And he says quite explicitly that the two characters that he uses most in the Alice books for inspiration as models were Alan and also Barry's daughter. So Alan, you can comment any time, but Barry does pay homage to Alan in the last page of Through the Looking Glass. Do I have? Yeah. For putting this together. So as Jim said, we'd never have Pennyroyal Alice without Alan Mandelbaum or Jim Kincaid, right? So how would you characterize the particular Pennyroyal vision, Alice's and her destinations? There's many possible ways of seeing Alice on her journeys. Well, why these? There's pretty dark, Moser's engravings and your comments and annotations.
Right, and I think now I should have emphasized more the various ways of seeing Alice, the various ways of reading and reacting to these great books. I was taken then with the notion of what I thought of as an unsentimental vision of these works, of Alice invading Wonderland, a child who failed to understand, who was resistant to all the what sort of insects do you rejoice in where you come from. What a line that is, rejoice in. And she responds by saying, I don't rejoice in insects at all, but I can give you the names of some of them. And it's a form of power, and so you can see where that goes. But that struck me as a line of inquiry, which at the time I thought was original and, as I say, unsweet, unsentimental, which made me feel tough, I think.
So I'm going to throw up a couple more quotes from your prefaces, and then we should have a look at one or two of the Moser images. One from Alice and maybe one from Looking Glass. So here comes the Alice one. You like that one, right?
Oh yeah. Who wouldn't? I mean, for one thing, the notion of characters spilling over the margins isn't that terrific? This relaxed, easy. You would have thought that this is the jury, and you would have thought that the trial is going to be serious, and here's some people just having fun. Look like they're at a bar.
We can get a little close up there, one of them.
Isn't that great? And it's one of those images in the book that contradicts the dark images or the images, say, of the Hatter, which appear kind of threatening. And here we have just this glorious, let's have fun.
Okay, so then the looking glass, or you can, just a close-up of your...
Yeah, and that, I just love the way the little claw things. Yeah.
Hang over.
Yeah, it's one of the...
right out of Star Wars, huh?
Yeah, right. But the ease of it, it's one of those that it works against or balances some of the dark images, like the image of the Hatter.
So, looking glass, an image from there.
Isn't that something? This is one of, it still frightens me to look at it, because you don't even know if that's the bottom. You know, you don't get a sense of how far is he going to fall. And it takes that nursery rhyme and darkens it terribly, it seems to me, brilliantly.
And there's a little close-up of Humpty.
Yeah, that I always thought that you mentioned that some of the characters based on real people. I think that's me.
Okay, and let's see, and that's another quote I took from your preface to Looking Glass. Again, the darkness and the coldness. And before we leave Barry and his illustrated editions, I want to give Barry a few words in this, because he notes that working with you in Colorado, he came to visit and you worked through the books, and thanks to you, the notions of a solitary Alice became clear to him. We just had the notions of silence and words in the book. Well, alone and loneliness also you found and pointed it out. And he wrote about the effort of capturing that vision in his 75 engravings and prints, plus 30 or so rejected blocks, all done over a 4-month period. He then quotes something George Bernard Shaw said, and this is the quote, "Only whiskey makes it possible." I seem to recall that it was bourbon that was his preferred fuel, correct? And what was it like working with Barry?
Barry, yeah, bourbon. It was, I could testify to that from the inside. Yeah, working with him was amazing. Nita and I talked. He would sit at the table and we'd talk our way through the books, and he would make sketches and then just throw them on the ground. And we've thought since, what idiots we were to get rid of those. You know, Barry, Moser's brilliant work. But it was a very extremely modest sort of person, and I realized I had to be careful about not making, not just glibly saying something. He would adopt it as gospel, So I learned, you can tell, with difficulty to shut up with Barry. But he was, I think he's a brilliant artist and a wonderfully modest, kind guy.
So, a new question, topic. So in the prefatory poem to Through the Looking Glass, it contains Carroll's lament, quote, "No thought of me shall find a place in thy young life's hereafter." Why is this so crucial to Carroll's view?
Carroll's balancing his love of the child against, as we all know, his recognition that Alice is insisting on growing up. Growing up means growing away. That is no longer interested in him. And he had many points in Carroll's writings where he talks about the insistence on growing up, that all his child friends left, and that growing up meant an abandonment of the poor, of the lonely and isolated Carroll, And we often get that feel, I think, in these great books of, come back, don't do this, don't, and we're countered by the recognition that that's what happens.
I think you are the first person, and I'm ad-libbing in a sense here, test my memory, but you're the first person to really explain that Alice is a composite Alice of all his child friends, little girls. So he's not just abandoning Alice or just not talking about Alice. He's talking about all those child friends at the same time. So another question that generally, and you've talked about this, is why I'm asking it, why are Alice trips always portrayed as falls? Where is she going and why?
Yeah.
Are we as readers falling with her, or are we mere voyeurs? Are we cheering her on, or are we viewing well with contempt?
The big question, of course, and I think everybody will react differently. And the idea of the fall, of course, so powerful, and the notion that somehow she's not only advancing into adulthood, but somehow falling into adulthood. That what we can see as progress, moving from age to age as we get older, is in fact decline. And the special point of decline is when the loss of childhood innocence and the eagerness with which children seem to welcome that loss. Here's Carroll often presenting himself in the image of this lonely, waving, come back, and the child doesn't hear. It's very poignant, and it's brilliantly done. I've kind of caricatured it, but we all know how powerful that is in these great books.
Yeah, he understood it very well. Martin Gardner, I note well, said that's for him, the most poignant moment in literature, when Alice, with the White Knight, leaves, being Carroll, and he's all concerned about her saying goodbye, but she's like, I'm going to get across the brook and become a queen in a hurry. Well, good news is we're exactly on schedule for the big question. Why Carroll? Why Alice? And you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. I mean, this all was part of a. I'll try to be brief. A moment in American cultural history of a lot of public daycare scandals and preschool child abuse scandals, and became interested in trying to figure why in our culture at that time there was so much emphasis on childhood innocence, and then the way the child became kind of prey to adults, voracious adults all over the place. And even in the original scandals, there were many charges against women as well as men, women teachers and the like, which is very odd. They dropped that. It didn't fit the script. But yeah, I think that when our culture became obsessed with innocence, it was a dark version of a much more ambiguous and powerful, complex view of innocence that Lewis Carroll should have projected for us. If we had only had Lewis Carroll more centrally at that time, I think we could have avoided a lot of pain for an awful lot of people.
So, and in my innocence, I was thinking about why Carroll, why Alice, why you, because as I noted, in 50 years, 6 decades of scholarship, you began with Dickens as a book and as a dissertation, and you stayed with Dickens, but you did the PMA article in the 70s, you did the Moser books in the 80s, we did a book in the 80s together. In the 90s, you did several books about childhood innocence and the Victorians. You wrote an essay on Looking Glass 4 or 5 years ago. And you're here today. You actually chaired a Carroll meeting at USC in 2007 or 8. That's like your whole academic life, professional life. Carroll's been there and Dickens has been there. So I was wondering, you know, why do you stick it out? Because then maybe you can tell me why I'm here. You know, it's the same. Yeah.
There is no end to the possibility of thinking about Lewis Carroll. It's not a bottomless pit. That'd be an ugly way to put it. But it's an ever-expanding, ever-expanding world. I think, and the more one thinks about Lewis Carroll, the more one realizes the possibilities of what's there. I think he's one of the premier artists of the 19th century.
Okay, so, and you go on till you come to the end, then stop, and I think we have just a couple of minutes for some questions. If there are any comments or questions from the audience, well, we'll stop. There's a woman here.
Yeah, I know you're talking about losing childhood, you know, in the quotes, but what I was wondering, I know you're talking about a lot of people, even the previous, talking about death. But my question is, because the children's book, of course, in a very subtle way, it's everybody, I see the use of word of death only in the mouse's tail.
Yeah.
After that, I don't hear that word, you know, only I think after a long time, she's saying this, yes, I heard about that death. I know you're talking about different stages. Why, and in the mouse's tail, it is done in very interestingly so that it is different from the book. So I am really interested in that issue, that why it was not directly used that word, though you're saying in different stages, but death was not used in the word.
Right, right. I think that what I was thinking, thank you, it's a wonderful, wonderful question.
You know why? I must say that. I lost my son 2 years.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And Alice has become my Bible. Really. If Alice would not have been here, I'm writing a book on Alice. I'm taking Alice to Egypt because I was there for 2 years. I was in Egypt for 2 years with all the animals. But what I'm saying that if Alice would not have been there in my life, I would not have survived. This is so powerful. He has so much. Right. And I am stuck in only in the 140 pages. I think I've read 150 times. I've not gone to the looking glass. So
yes.
It is very interesting. But my thing has nothing to do with death.
And condemn them. I think that there's one of the currents in the Alice books, say we have the trial, which becomes a parody of trials which presumably settle things, right? This is it, this is this, this is that, and this is that often is execution in the book, right? Except they never executes nobody.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a way in which death doesn't really loom. It's just not there. That finality, that settledness, is not part of the world that Carroll, at least in my view, Carroll.
There's no violence really in the books, because no harm in terms of violence in the book. Off with your head and nobody loses their head. And they say, don't worry, nobody loses their head. But there is survival of Alice is clear. But there's death jokes throughout both books. The first chapter, when she's falling, what's going to happen to her? She's on the roof with Bill. There's lots of dangers. And the two that persist in both books. One is going out like a candle. She obsesses twice about that. That's death. Or Carroll or Alice thinks, well, what is that moment after you go out like a candle? It's this almost metaphysical moment questioning. And the other is just simply falling. and not realizing it and dying, and it happens in both books. If there's one more question, or that's good. We're right on time. Thank you for Jim Kincaid's time.
Thank you very much, Jim and Edward. It was fascinating.